Someone get the AED now, Annie screamed. The tray in her hands crashed to the floor. 3 champagne flutes flew off it, one rolling beneath a nearby table. But Annie didn't even look back. She rushed through the stunned guests and dropped to her knees beside Victoria Whitmore. "Miss Whitmore, can you hear me?" No response. Annie firmly touched Victoria's shoulder. "Victoria?" Still nothing. She leaned down to check her breathing. Within seconds, Annie's expression changed. "No, this isn't right." A woman in a silver dress covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God, what's wrong with her? Is she having a heart attack? Where's the doctor?" Annie's head snapped up. "I need an AED. Right now." Her voice cut through the rising murmur across the ballroom. An older man stared at her in confusion. "What's an AED?" "The defibrillator. The box with the red heart symbol." "Go find it." Everyone immediately sprang into motion. "Where is it? Does anyone know?" "Check the lobby. Ask the front desk. Maybe it's near the elevators." 2 men ran toward the main entrance. A hotel employee rushed into another hallway. One guest shouted as he ran, "Where's the AED?" Annie forced herself to remember. The white cabinet, the red heart symbol. She had walked past it before her shift began. "The west hallway," Annie shouted. "Near the west elevators, I saw it there." A man in a tuxedo immediately ran in that direction. Annie turned back to Victoria. Her hands had already begun to shake. "Come on, please, don't give up on me now." She had just positioned her hands to begin chest compressions when someone suddenly grabbed her shoulder. "Move." Annie spun around. Dr. Adrian Keller pushed through the crowd. His suit jacket hung open. Several guests visibly relaxed the moment they recognized him. "Dr. Keller, thank God you're here." She just collapsed. Keller knelt beside Victoria. Annie spoke immediately. "She's unresponsive. Her breathing isn't normal." "I can see that." "Then start CPR." Keller placed 2 fingers against Victoria's neck. Annie waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. He still didn't begin compressions. "What are you waiting for?" "I'm examining her. She's not breathing normally." "I heard you." Annie turned toward the hallway. "Where's the AED? Has anyone found it?" A voice called back. "Not yet. I can't find it." "Check downstairs." Annie immediately reached into her apron pocket. "I'm calling 911. Keller's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "No." Annie froze. "What did you say?" "Put the phone away. She needs an ambulance." "I'm her physician." Annie yanked her hand free. "Then you should know better than anyone that she needs an ambulance." Several guests began looking at Keller. He stood. "Everyone, step back. There's no need to panic. Victoria has had dizzy spells before. I need everyone to give me room so I can examine her." Annie looked at Victoria lying motionless on the floor. Then she stared up at him in disbelief. "Dizzy spells?" Keller looked at her. "You don't know her medical history. But I know what someone who isn't breathing normally looks like." Annie raised her phone again. Keller blocked her hand. "That's enough. Why do you keep stopping me from calling 911? Because you're creating chaos." "No." Annie's voice trembled. This time, it was anger. "I'm trying to save her." Keller turned toward 2 security officers who had just pushed through the crowd. "Get her out of here." Annie's eyes widened. One of the guards hesitated. "Doctor, she's interfering with patient care." "Get her away from Victoria." The 2 guards stepped toward Annie. She immediately lowered herself closer beside Victoria. "No, don't touch me." "Ma'am, please stand up." "No. You need to let the doctor work." Annie pointed directly at Keller. "He isn't doing anything." Keller turned toward the guests. "Everyone stay calm. Victoria is receiving medical care." Annie stared at him. "Medical care?" Her voice cracked. "She's lying motionless on the floor. You're not doing CPR. You haven't called an ambulance. And you're stopping everyone else from calling 911. You call that medical care?" An older man in the crowd spoke up. "The girl is right." Keller snapped toward him. "Please don't interfere." Annie used the distraction to reach for her phone. One guard grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, please don't resist us." "Let me go." The second guard grabbed her other arm. Annie struggled hard. "Someone call 911. Please, she could die." Several guests immediately pulled out their phones. Keller shouted, "There's no need to call. Don't flood the emergency line. I have the situation under control." Annie suddenly stopped struggling. Only for half a second, those words lodged in her mind. "Under control." Victoria still wasn't moving. No AED, no ambulance, no CPR, and Keller was spending all his energy stopping anyone from bringing in people who could save Victoria. Annie stared at him. A cold sensation ran down her spine. Then she remembered. Less than 10 minutes earlier, Victoria had been standing with Keller near the edge of the ballroom. Victoria had raised a hand to her chest. She had said something about an unusual flutter. Keller had reached inside his jacket. He had given Victoria something. At the time, Annie had been walking past with a tray of drinks and hadn't stopped. Now she looked down at Victoria's arm. A small piece of cotton was still pressed against the inside of it. Annie's heart pounded. She didn't know what Keller had done. She didn't know whether what she had just remembered had anything to do with Victoria's collapse. But she knew one thing now. She could not let Keller keep stopping people from saving Victoria. "Let me go." Annie jerked her entire body. One arm came free. She shoved her hand into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and hit the emergency call button. Keller immediately lunged toward her. "Give me the phone." Annie twisted away. "No." "Annie, give it to me." She froze. Annie. She had never introduced herself to him. But there was no time to think about it. The call connected. 911. "What is the address of your emergency?" Annie almost cried when she heard the dispatcher's voice. "The Grand Marlowe Hotel in downtown Houston. The Whitmore Foundation Gala. A woman just collapsed. She's unresponsive and not breathing normally. Please send an ambulance now." Keller reached for the phone. Annie switched it to speaker and dropped it onto the carpet beyond his reach. The dispatcher's voice immediately came through. "Has CPR been started?" "Not yet, they keep pulling me away." "Begin chest compressions now." Annie lunged back toward Victoria. Keller grabbed her shoulder. "Stop." Annie tore his hand off hair. "Get your hands off me." She dropped to her knees beside Victoria, placed her hands correctly, and began pressing down hard. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keller leaned toward her. "You have no idea what you're doing." Annie didn't stop. 5, 6, 7. "I told you to stop." Annie looked up. Her eyes were red, and sweat had broken across her forehead. "Then you do it." Keller froze. Annie shouted, "You're the doctor." Her hands kept driving down. "So why am I the one trying to save her?" Keller's jaw hardened. "Security." The two guards stepped forward again. Annie immediately shouted, "Don't pull me away. The dispatcher is telling me to keep going." The voice from the phone rang out clearly. "Continue chest compressions. The ambulance is on the way." The two guards stopped. Keller turned toward them. "What are you standing there for?" One guard looked at him, then at Annie. "Doctor." 911 is telling her to continue CPR. For a moment, Keller had no answer. Annie saw something change in his eyes. At that exact moment, the man who had gone to find the AED came running back. His hands were empty. "It's not there." Annie snapped her head toward him. "What?" "I checked by the west elevators. I couldn't find it." "That's impossible." Annie nearly screamed. "I saw it there." Keller immediately cut in. "I already told you. There is no AED on this floor." Annie looked at him. "You're lying." The murmuring around them died instantly. Keller slowly turned toward her. "What did you just say?" Annie didn't stop compressions. "I saw the cabinet." "You're mistaken." "No." She pressed down. Then again, "I remember exactly where it is." Keller stepped toward her. "You're crossing a line." Annie looked up. "And what are you doing?" Keller stopped. "You stopped me from calling an ambulance." Several guests began staring at him. "You told everyone not to call 911. Annie was breathing hard, but her hands never stopped. "You ordered security to drag me away from someone who isn't breathing normally." "That's enough." Keller moved toward her quickly. Annie saw his hand reaching for her. "No." The scream tore from her throat. "You're the one who needs to stop." Keller bent down again, reaching for her. Annie immediately turned toward the private reception area. "Mr. Whitmore." Keller froze. Annie saw his reaction, and she shouted louder. "Mr. Whitmore, please come out here." The double doors at the far end of the ballroom flew open. Richard Whitmore stepped out, his phone still in his hand. He took one step and saw Victoria. His entire body went rigid. "Victoria?" The phone nearly slipped from his hand. "Victoria." Richard rushed forward. Then he saw Annie kneeling beside his sister. With every compression, her arms shook from exhaustion. He heard the 911 dispatcher coming through the phone on speaker. "Continue chest compressions. Emergency medical services are on the way." Richard stopped for a beat. His gaze swept toward the two security officers standing nearby. Then to Adrian Keller. The doctor he had trusted for nearly a decade was standing directly over Annie. One hand was still raised as though he had just been about to pull her away from Victoria. Richard looked at that hand, then at Annie. What the hell is going on? Keller immediately stepped forward. Richard, listen to me. This girl is interfering with treatment. No, Annie shouted. Her hands never stopped pressing down. Don't listen to him. Keller spun toward her. Shut up. Richard stared directly at Keller. What did you just say to her? Keller froze. Richard, everything is chaotic. I'm trying to handle this. My sister is lying on the floor. Richard's voice exploded so violently that Keller fell silent. He pointed at Victoria. My sister isn't breathing normally. Then he pointed at Annie. This girl is doing chest compressions on her. Then Richard pointed down at the phone on speaker. 911 has been called. He turned back to Keller. And what the hell are you doing? Keller opened his mouth. Richard, where's the AED? No one answered. Richard shouted louder. I asked where the AED is. Annie was breathing hard. I sent people to get it. Richard turned toward her. Where? The west hallway. Near the elevators. I saw it there earlier. The man who had just returned spoke up. I checked. There was no machine. Keller immediately cut in. Because there isn't an AED on this floor. Annie snapped her head toward him. You're lying again. That's enough. Keller stepped toward her. Annie didn't move away. She only looked at Richard. Please. Her voice broke. Her hand still didn't stop. I don't know why he's doing this. But he stopped me from calling 911. He told security to drag me away from your sister. He even told everyone not to call an ambulance. Richard didn't answer Annie right away. His eyes dropped to Victoria, motionless on the floor. Then he looked at the phone lying on the carpet, where the 911 dispatcher's voice continued to ring out. Continue chest compressions. Don't stop. Emergency medical personnel are on the way. Finally, Richard looked at Keller. The doctor's hand was still hovering only inches from Annie's shoulder, as though he had been about to drag her away from Victoria yet again. Richard turned fully toward him. What is going on? Keller immediately stepped forward. Richard, listen to me. She's panicking. I'm only trying to get her out of the way so I can properly examine Victoria. Annie kept performing chest compressions. Her arms trembled with every push. She needs an AED, Annie said between ragged breaths. He says there isn't one on this floor, but I saw it. Richard immediately looked toward the west hallway. Keller grabbed his arm. Don't listen to her. Victoria could be having a neurological episode. Let me handle this. Richard looked down at Keller's hand gripping his arm. Then he looked straight into his eyes. At that moment, the dispatcher's voice came through again. Continue chest compressions. Do not stop until the AED arrives or emergency medical personnel take over. Richard slowly pulled his arm free from Keller's grip. Has an ambulance been called? Keller didn't answer immediately. Only 1 second. But that single second was enough to change the look in Richard's eyes. You didn't call one? Richard, I'm trying to assess Victoria's condition. My sister is lying on the floor and not breathing normally, and you haven't called an ambulance. I'm her doctor. Richard stepped closer. Then why is an 18-year-old girl doing more than you are? Keller clenched his jaw. Because she refuses to step aside. Annie heard him, but she didn't stop. One compression, then another. Her shoulders shook with exhaustion. Mr. Whitmore. Richard immediately turned toward her. Annie struggled to catch her breath. West hallway. Near the elevators. White cabinet. Red heart on the front. Richard pointed at a security officer. Go. The guard had barely turned when Annie shouted. Wait. Everyone looked at her. The man who went before couldn't find it. You have to check the wall carefully. I know it's there. Richard looked toward the hallway. Then he stopped giving orders. He ran himself. Richard, Keller shouted. Richard was already through the double doors. Keller immediately tried to follow, but the head of security stepped into his path. Doctor, you stay here. Keller glared him. Move. I have my orders. Do you know who I am? Yes. Then move. The man didn't budge. Not tonight. Keller froze. Annie barely heard any of it anymore. Her palms burned. Her arms felt like lead. Sweat ran down her temple, but she kept pressing. Keep going, the dispatcher said. Hard and fast. I am. Any change? Annie looked at Victoria. No, don't stop. Help is almost there. Keller stepped toward Annie again. You're exhausting yourself for nothing. Annie looked up. Her hands never stopped. What did you just say? You don't know Victoria's medical history. Then tell me what I need to know. That is none of your concern. Annie breathed hard. She's dying right in front of me. Another compression. So now it is my concern. Several guests looked at Keller. A woman standing nearby finally spoke up. Why isn't the doctor helping her? Keller heard here. He turned toward the crowd. Please stop speculating. Miss Whitmore is receiving appropriate medical care. Annie snapped her eyes toward him. Appropriate? Keller turned sharply. Don't speak to me in that tone. Then stop trying to pull me away from someone who needs CPR. Keller took another step forward. At that exact moment, the west doors flew open. Richard came running back. The AED was in his hands. I found it. Annie nearly cried with relief. Keller had the opposite reaction. The color in his face changed completely. Richard held up the machine. Less than 30 feet away. Keller's mouth opened. I didn't know it was there. Richard stared at him. How many times have you been to this hotel? That doesn't mean I memorized the location of every piece of emergency equipment. Mr. Whitmore, Annie called. Richard immediately turned. Bring it here. He rushed over, dropped to his knees beside Victoria, and set the AED next to Annie. What do I do? Open it. Richard tore the case open. Turn it on. He did so immediately. The electronic voice began giving instructions. Annie followed each step. Richard helped clear the area around Victoria, but his hands shook violently as he looked at his sister's pale face. Here? He asked. Yes. Right there. Keller stepped forward again. Richard immediately raised one hand. No. Richard, let me examine Victoria. Richard looked at him. You had your chance. That girl isn't qualified to. Richard shot to his feet. She called 911. Keller fell silent. She started CPR. Richard took one step toward him. She knew where the AED was. Then another. And you told everyone it didn't exist. Richard. Enough. Richard turned toward the two security officers. Keep him away from my sister. The AED began analyzing Victoria's heart rhythm. Annie immediately shouted, Everybody clear. A few people still didn't understand. Annie raised her voice. Do not touch her. Richard spread both arms, forcing everyone back. Back up. Everybody back. The machine announced its decision. Shock advised. Annie followed the instructions. Victoria's body jerked slightly. Richard held his breath. Victoria. Then she went still again. Resume CPR. Annie immediately began chest compressions again. Richard dropped to his knees beside her. Is it working? I don't know yet. What do you need? Keep the path clear. When the paramedics arrive, make sure they come straight here. Richard sprang to his feet. Clear a path to the main entrance. No one moved fast enough. Richard roared. Move every chair out of the way, now. This time, everyone moved. Chairs were dragged aside. Hotel staff pushed tables out of the path. Both main doors were thrown wide open. Someone ran straight into the lobby to meet the ambulance crew. Keller stood between the two security officers. Annie was still performing compressions when she suddenly noticed his gaze drop. He wasn't looking at Victoria's face. He was looking at her arm. Annie followed his eyes. The small piece of cotton was still pressed against the inside of Victoria's arm. An image flashed back into Annie's mind. Victoria standing beside Keller only minutes earlier. Her hand pressed to her chest. Keller taking something from inside his jacket. Then the piece of cotton. Annie looked toward the phone. Dispatcher, I'm still here. There's something else. Go ahead. Annie drew a breath. I think she may have been given something before she collapsed. Keller immediately lunged forward. Stop talking nonsense. The two security officers held him back. Annie kept doing compressions. I didn't say I know what it was. You're accusing me. I'm telling them what I saw. Richard spun toward Keller. What did you give Victoria? Keller breathed heavily. Nothing dangerous. Richard froze. Annie looked up too. Keller realized what he had just said. Richard slowly walked toward him. I didn't ask whether it was dangerous. Keller said nothing. Adrian. Richard took another step. I asked what you gave my sister. I was treating her. With what? Richard. It's more complicated than. With what? If Annie's courage moved you and you believe she did the right thing by refusing to give up on Victoria, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Richard's shout made everyone nearby flinch. Keller could no longer answer. At that moment, ambulance sirens sounded outside the hotel. "The paramedics are here," someone shouted. Seconds later, the emergency crew rushed inside with a stretcher and equipment bags. One paramedic dropped to his knees beside Annie. "We've got her. Give me the handoff." Annie immediately pulled her hands back, gasping for breath. She suddenly collapsed. She was unresponsive and breathing abnormally. I started CPR. The AED delivered one shock. She pointed toward Victoria's arm, and I think she may have been given something before she collapsed. I don't know what it was. The paramedic followed her gesture. "What makes you think that?" "I saw her with that doctor a few minutes before it happened. He gave her something." Annie looked toward Keller. "Then he tried to stop me from calling 911, told security to drag me away, and told everyone there wasn't an AED on this floor." The paramedic glanced at Keller. "All right, we'll report that to the hospital." The emergency crew took over Victoria's care. Annie moved aside. Only then did she realize how badly her hands were trembling. She tried to close them into fists, but her fingers barely obeyed. The stretcher was lifted. Richard walked close beside his sister. "Victoria." He gently touched her hand. "I'm here." The paramedics began wheeling the stretcher toward the doors. Richard followed for several steps, then stopped abruptly. He turned around. "Security." "Yes, sir?" Richard pointed directly at Keller. "He does not leave." Keller jerked against the guards. "Richard, don't be ridiculous. Keep him here until the police arrive. You can't detain me because of the word of some waitress." Richard spun around. "That waitress just performed CPR on my sister until her hands wouldn't stop shaking." Keller fell silent. Richard stepped toward him. "And while she was doing that, what were you doing? You don't understand what happened." Richard looked toward the hallway. The AED cabinet was still open. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he turned back to Keller. "No." His voice dropped. "I don't understand everything that happened." Keller stared at him. Richard pointed toward the cabinet. "But I know that machine was exactly where Annie said it would be." He pointed toward the phone still connected to 911. "I know you didn't call for an ambulance." Then Richard's eyes shifted toward the two security officers. "And I know you tried to pull away the only person who was actually saving my sister." The color drained from Keller's face. Richard stared at him for one more second. "That's enough for me to start asking questions." He turned and ran after the paramedics. Annie finally lowered herself into a nearby chair. She bowed her head, her hands still trembling in her lap. The phone was still on speaker. "Dispatcher?" "Yes, I'm still here." Annie swallowed. "They took her. You did everything you could until emergency personnel arrived." Annie closed her eyes. Outside, the ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren rose, then slowly faded into the distance. Adrian Keller remained standing between two security officers, staring toward the path where Victoria had just been taken. The dispatcher finally released Annie from the call after confirming that paramedics had taken over. When the screen went dark, she kept the phone in both hands for a moment, trying to slow her breathing. Around her, hotel staff were moving chairs back into place, but nobody returned to the easy rhythm of the gala. The music had stopped. Half-finished dinners sat untouched, and the open AED cabinet in the west hallway had become impossible to ignore. A woman in a silver dress approached Annie with a glass of water. "Here, honey." "Thank you." Annie took it, but her fingers shook against the glass. "You did everything you could," the woman said. Annie looked toward the doors where the paramedics had disappeared. "I hope it was enough." Before the woman could answer, two Houston police officers entered with a hotel manager. Detective Lena Morales followed them, wearing a dark jacket over plain clothes and carrying a small notebook. Keller straightened as soon as he saw them. "Finally, maybe someone can bring some sense back into this." Morales looked at the security officers holding position near him. "Dr. Keller?" "Yes. I'm Detective Morales. I understand there was a medical emergency." There was, and unfortunately an employee interfered with treatment. Annie lifted her head. Keller continued before anyone asked him another question. She panicked, ignored instructions, and began performing procedures without knowing Miss Whitmore's history. Morales glanced toward Annie, then back to Keller. "Did you call 911? Quelle pause? I was evaluating my patient." "That wasn't my question." "No." "Did you begin CPR?" "I was determining the cause of her collapse." Morales wrote something down. Did you know there was an AED outside the ballroom? Keller's expression tightened. I was not aware of its exact location. Annie stood. That's not what you said. One officer turned toward her. Morales raised a hand. You'll get your turn. Annie nodded and sat again. Keller adjusted the front of his jacket. I told the girl to step away because she was creating confusion. Morales looked toward the open hallway. Security footage will help us sort that out. For the first time, Keller stopped trying to explain. Morales turned to Annie. Miss Carter? Yes, ma'am. Can you walk with me somewhere quieter? Annie followed her toward a smaller reception area near the ballroom entrance. The detective did not ask Annie what she thought had happened. She asked what she had actually seen. What was Miss Whitmore doing before she collapsed? Talking to guests. Then she looked like she didn't feel right. Did you see anyone give her food or medication? Annie hesitated. I saw Dr. Keller give her something earlier. Something? I couldn't tell what it was. I was working. Did you see her take it? I saw them together. He reached into his jacket. After that, I moved on. Morales made another note. What about the mark on her arm? I noticed it while I was doing compressions. You know what caused it? No, Mom. Morales looked up. Good answer. Annie frowned. Why? Because guessing is where witnesses get themselves into trouble. Tell me what you know. Leave the rest to us. Annie nodded. The thing I know for sure is that he kept stopping me. Dr. Keller? Yes. He grabbed me. He told security to pull me away. He said there wasn't an AED on this floor. And you knew there was? I had seen it before the gala started. Morales looked toward the west hallway again. Anything else? Annie thought carefully. When I called 911, he tried to stop that too. Did he explain why? He said he was Victoria's doctor. That's all? Annie swallowed. He told the guests not to call because he had everything under control. Morales closed the notebook. Your 911 call is recorded. That matters. Annie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Is Victoria going to be okay? I don't know yet. At Memorial Hermann, Richard Whitmore stood near the nurses' station while physicians worked behind closed doors. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his tie loosened, and the phone in his hand had been ringing every few minutes. Assistants, lawyers, business partners. He ignored them all. A physician finally approached. Mr. Whitmore? Richard stepped forward immediately. My sister? She has a pulse. She's stable enough for us to continue treatment. Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. Is she awake? Not yet. What happened to her? We're still working on that. Richard lowered his voice. Doctor, she was fine at dinner. I understand. She collapsed without warning. We're running cardiac studies, blood work, toxicology, everything we need. Toxicology? The physician studied him. We don't know what caused the arrhythmia yet. We're not ruling anything out. Richard's jaw tightened. Someone gave her something. Who? Her private physician. The doctor's expression changed. Do you know what? No. Then make sure the police know exactly what you saw, and let us confirm what is in her system. Richard nodded, but his hands had curled into fists. How close was she? The physician understood the question. To dying? Richard didn't answer. The doctor spoke carefully. The early CPR mattered. So did the AED. If treatment had been delayed much longer, we could be having a very different conversation. Richard looked toward the double doors. The girl who started CPR. Annie Carter. I don't know her. She works banquets at the hotel. The doctor lifted his eyebrows. She did the right thing. Richard gave a short, bitter laugh. She did more than my sister's doctor. His phone vibrated again. This time it was his security chief. Richard answered. Yes? Police are still at the hotel. Keller's being interviewed. Do not let anyone interfere. Understood. And preserve every camera recording from tonight. Hallways, elevators, ballroom, service entrances, everything. There was a brief pause. Yes, sir. Richard ended the call. A few minutes later, Detective Morales phoned him directly. Mr. Whitmore, I've spoken with Miss Carter. And her account is consistent with the 911 recordings so far. What did Keller say? That she was interfering with medical care. Richard looked toward the treatment doors. He lied about the AED. I know. He tried to stop her from calling 911. We're looking at that too. Then arrest him. Morales did not raise her voice. That's not how this works. My sister almost died. And if someone caused that, I want evidence strong enough that their lawyer can't tear it apart tomorrow morning. Richard said nothing. Morales continued, "You can help by not turning this into a private war." Richard looked down at the expensive watch on his wrist. For years, people had moved faster when he demanded it. Tonight, nobody could promise him the one thing he wanted. "Fine," he said. "Tell me what you need. Start with access to the hotel security system and your sister's schedule for the last 48 hours. You'll have both." The call ended. Richard remained in the hospital corridor until another physician appeared nearly an hour later, carrying a tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, we have preliminary lab results." Richard stepped toward him. The doctor lowered his voice. "We found a substance in your sister's blood that is not listed anywhere in her prescription history." Richard's face hardened. "What kind of substance?" "One capable of affecting cardiac rhythm." For several seconds, Richard said nothing. Then one image returned with brutal clarity. Keller telling everyone there was no AED while Annie fought to keep Victoria alive. The doctor continued, "We need to repeat the testing before we make any final conclusions." Richard nodded once. "Do that." He took out his phone and called Morales. She answered on the second ring. "Detective, what happened?" Richard looked through the glass toward where his sister was being treated. "You were right about needing evidence." Pause. "Tell me." "The hospital found something in Victoria's blood." Morales's voice changed. "What?" "Something that should not be there." Richard's next words came slowly. "And I want to know exactly who put it there." Detective Morales arrived at Memorial Hermann before dawn. Richard was still outside Victoria's treatment area when she stepped off the elevator, a paper cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. "You said the hospital found something." Richard nodded toward the physician waiting nearby. "Dr. Patel can explain it better than I can." The physician joined them. "The first screening detected a pharmaceutical agent that can interfere with cardiac rhythm. We're repeating the test and sending additional samples to toxicology." Morales asked, "Was Miss Whitmore prescribed anything in that category?" "Nothing in the records we have." "Could she have taken it accidentally?" "It's possible. I'm not prepared to tell you how it entered her system." Richard's jaw tightened. Keller gave her something at the gala. Morales turned to him. "You saw that?" "No." "Then don't say it as fact." Richard's eyes hardened, but he stopped himself. Morales continued. "Annie Carter reported seeing Keller hand Victoria something before the collapse. That makes it a lead. It does not make it proof." Richard gave a short nod. "Understood." It was the first time that night anyone had told him to slow down and received cooperation instead of an argument. Morales moved a few feet away and called one of the officers still at the Grand Marlowe. "I want every security recording preserved before anybody touches the system. Ballroom entrances, west hallway, elevators, service corridors, lobby. Start 2 hours before the gala, and keep everything through the police response." She listened. "And the AED cabinet?" Another pause. "Photograph it exactly as it is. Don't move anything until crime scene personnel document it." Richard watched her end the call. "What happens to Keller now?" "He's being interviewed." "That's all?" "For now." He tried to stop CPR. "We have Annie's statement and the 911 recording. He lied about the AED, and the cameras may show whether he passed it earlier." Richard looked toward Victoria's doors again. "How much evidence do you need?" Morales took a drink of coffee. "Enough that the truth survives a courtroom." Richard said nothing after that. Across town, Annie sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment wearing an oversized sweatshirt over her work clothes. She had showered twice, but she could still feel the pressure of Victoria's chest beneath her hands. Her mother, Lillian, placed a plate in front of her. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." 3 bites. "Mum." "Tfu." Annie almost smiled. Lillian had reheated roast chicken, green beans, and cornbread from dinner. Annie broke off a small piece of cornbread and stared at it without eating. "You keep looking at your phone," Lillian said. "The detective might call." "The detective already called you twice. They found something in Victoria's blood." Lillian stopped wiping the counter. "What kind of something?" "They didn't tell me." "Do they think somebody did this to her?" "I don't know." That answer bothered Annie more than if she had been told yes. She picked up her phone when it vibrated. Unknown number. "Hello? Miss Carter? This is Detective Morales." "Yes, ma'am. I need to go over a few details from your statement. Not because you did anything wrong. I want the timeline clean." Annie sat straighter. Okay, start with the last time you saw Miss Whitmore before she collapsed. Annie closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. She was near the east side of the ballroom. Dr. Keller was with her. What were they doing? Talking. Did you hear them? Not clearly. Did you see Keller give her anything? I saw him reach into his jacket. He had something in his hand. I saw Victoria take it, but I couldn't tell exactly what it was. Could it have been a pill? Maybe. Could it have been something else? Yes. Morales paused. Good. Keep answering that way. Annie frowned. What way? Don't fill gaps because you think I want a stronger answer. I'm not. I know. That's why I'm telling you to keep doing what you're doing. Annie looked at her mother. Lillian remained nearby but did not interrupt. Morales asked, when did you first suspect something wasn't right about Keller? When he said there wasn't an AED. Not when Victoria collapsed? No. People collapse for all kinds of reasons. I didn't know why. And when he tried to stop you? That made it worse. What exactly did he do? He grabbed my wrist when I tried to call 911. Then he called security and told them to pull me away. Morales was quiet for a second while she wrote. Did Keller ever begin chest compressions? No. Did he tell anyone else to call 911? No. Did he ask for the AED? No. Did he try to use it after Richard brought it back? No. Annie swallowed. Saying the answers one after another made the night feel different. At the gala, there had been too much noise, too many people moving at once. Now the pattern was harder to ignore. Morales asked, Annie, I need one more thing from you. What do you think Keller did? Annie hesitated. Then she remembered what the detective had told her. I don't know. You don't think he poisoned Victoria? I think something was wrong. I think he tried to stop me from getting help, but I didn't see him poison anybody. That distinction matters. After the call ended, Lillian finally sat across from her. You did right. I don't feel like I did anything right. You told the truth. That doesn't mean they'll believe me. Lillian studied her daughter. Then that is their test, not yours. By late morning, a short video from the gala had already reached local television. Someone had recorded the final seconds before Richard ran for the AED. Annie appeared in the frame on her knees beside Victoria, shouting toward the west hallway while Keller stood only a few feet away. The first headline called her a banquet worker who had helped save a billionaire's sister. The second called her a teenage hero. Annie hated both. She turned off the television. I don't want people coming here. They won't, Lillian said. A knock sounded almost immediately. Both women looked at the door. Lillian walked over but did not open it. Who is it? Houston Chronicle. We'd like to speak with Annie Carter. Lillian looked at Annie. Annie shook her head. Lillian called through the door. She has nothing to say. Ma'am, we only need 5 minutes. No. Could we leave a card? You can slide it under the door. A business card appeared beneath the frame. Lillian picked it up and placed it face down on the table. Annie let out a breath. Thank you. You don't owe strangers your whole life because you helped someone. At the hospital, Victoria opened her eyes shortly after noon. Richard was beside her within minutes. Hey, he said. Her voice came out weak. You look terrible. Richard laughed once, despite himself. You nearly died and you're criticizing my face? You've always needed someone to. He pulled a chair closer. Do you remember anything? Victoria's expression changed. Some. Did Keller give you something? She looked toward the window, searching her memory. He said it would settle my heart. I told him I felt a flutter. What did he give you? I don't know. Richard leaned forward. Victoria, why were you looking for me before you collapsed? She turned back to him. I needed to show you something. What? The foundation accounts. Richard's face tightened. What about them? There are payments that don't make sense. Clinics I can't verify. Vendors with different names using the same contacts. I asked finance for the underlying records. When? Yesterday morning. Did Keller know? Victoria closed her eyes briefly. I think so. Richard's phone was already in his hand. Where are the files? I saved copies. Where? Not on the foundation server. Richard looked at her. For the first time since she had awakened, Victoria sounded afraid. Richard, I was going to tell you after the gala. He lowered the phone. You should have told me before. I tried. That landed harder than he expected. He had delayed the conversation because there had always been another call, another donor, another meeting that felt urgent. Now his sister had survived by minutes. Richard stood and called Morales. When she answered, he said, Detective, This isn't only about what was in Victoria's blood, Morales replied. What did she tell you? Richard looked at his sister. She was investigating money missing from our health foundation. A short pause, and Keller may have known. Morales's response came immediately. Don't access anything yet. Don't call your finance people. Don't warn anybody. Richard frowned. Those are my records, and right now they may also be evidence. He looked down at Victoria, then toward the hospital corridor. For once, he did not argue. All right, Morales continued. I'm coming back. Richard ended the call. Victoria watched him put the phone away. You listened. To a detective? To anyone. Richard gave her a tired look. Don't get used to it. But neither of them smiled this time, because somewhere between the gala and that hospital bed, what had begun as a medical emergency had changed into something larger. And the first person to notice that something was wrong had been the young woman everyone else had been ready to remove. By late afternoon, Detective Morales was back at the Grand Marlowe with 2 officers, a hotel security supervisor, and a technician from the building's surveillance department. Richard arrived a few minutes later, but Morales stopped him before he could enter the monitoring office. You're here as the victim's brother, not as the owner of half the city. I don't own half the city. Good, then this should be easy. Richard folded his arms. I want to see the footage. You can, after we secure copies. He almost argued, then remembered Victoria lying in the hospital and Annie's voice on the 911 call. Fine. Inside, the technician pulled up the gala recordings from several cameras. The first angle showed guests arriving, staff carrying trays, donors shaking hands, and Keller moving easily through the crowd as if he had no reason to fear anyone. Morales watched without speaking. Then the technician stopped the video. There, Victoria stood near the east side of the event hall with Keller beside her. Richard leaned closer. Keller reached inside his jacket. The angle was too distant to show exactly what he placed in his hand, but Victoria accepted something from him. Can you enlarge that? Richard asked. We can zoom, the technician said, but that won't create detail the camera never captured. The image grew larger and less clear. Richard clenched his jaw. Keep going. They watched Victoria walk away. Keller remained behind for several seconds, checking the crowd before moving in another direction. 8 minutes later, another camera showed Victoria entering the main gathering area. Less than 3 minutes after that, she collapsed. Morales asked, Show me the west hallway. The technician switched feeds. Keller appeared on the recording approximately 20 minutes before Victoria's collapse. He walked directly past the white AED cabinet. Richard leaned toward the monitor. Morales said, Don't say it. I wasn't going to. You were. Richard pointed at the screen. He walked within 2 feet of it. Yes. And later he said there wasn't one on that floor. Yes. Tell me again why he isn't sitting in a cell. Morales turned toward him. Because a lie about an AED is evidence. It isn't the whole case. The technician advanced the footage. Another angle captured Richard returning with the machine while Keller stood between the security officers. Morales requested copies of every relevant feed, then asked for access logs showing whether any footage had been altered or deleted. Richard looked at her. You think someone might try? I think people who are frightened by evidence sometimes become interested in making evidence disappear. That ended his questions. The 911 recording was harder to hear. Morales played it from a laptop while Richard sat across from her. Annie's voice came first, breathless but clear. The Grand Marlowe Hotel, downtown Houston. A woman collapsed. She's unresponsive and not breathing normally. Then Keller's voice entered the background. Put it away. Richard's expression changed. The recording continued. Has CPR been started? Not yet. They keep pulling me away. Richard looked down at the table. Morales kept the audio going. Continue compressions. Help is being dispatched. Then Annie again, louder. He says there's no AED, but I know where it is. For several seconds, Richard did not move. Finally, he said, he knew. Morales closed the laptop. We can prove he passed the cabinet. We can prove he denied knowing where it was. We can prove he tried to stop Annie from calling emergency services. We still need to prove why. Richard nodded. His phone vibrated. It was Dr. Patel. Richard answered immediately. Doctor? We repeated the toxicology testing. Richard stood. And? The result is consistent with the earlier screen. The substance was present in a medically significant amount. Was Victoria prescribed it? No. Could she have taken it herself? We haven't found anything indicating that. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. What does it do? It can disrupt heart rhythm under certain conditions. That's all I'm comfortable saying until the full report is complete. Was it enough to cause what happened? It may have contributed. We need the full medical review before making that conclusion. Richard thanked him and ended the call. Morales had been watching his face. Confirmed? Yes. She stood. Then we moved faster. The next morning, Annie returned to work. She almost called in sick. Instead, she tied her apron, pinned her hair back, and entered through the employee entrance as she had dozens of times before. The hotel felt different. Everyone knew her name now. A dishwasher gave her a thumbs up. One of the front desk employees said, "That was incredible." A banquet captain tried to hug her. Annie stopped him with a tired smile. "Can everybody please act normal?" From behind a stack of folded chairs, Samuel Reed, one of the older banquet workers, called out, "You heard her. Hero or no hero? These chairs aren't stacking themselves." Annie laughed for the first time since the gala. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He pointed at her. "Don't thank me yet. You're taking the heavy side." They worked for several minutes before Samuel spoke again. "You did good." Annie kept folding linens. "I did what the dispatcher told me." Most people were standing around waiting for permission to care. She stopped. Samuel shrugged. "Experience teaches you something. People don't always freeze because they're weak. Sometimes they freeze because they're afraid of being the first person to look foolish." Annie thought of Keller. He wasn't afraid of looking foolish. No? He was afraid I'd keep going. Samuel's expression changed. Before he could answer, the service door opened. Richard Whitmore stepped inside. No limousine entrance. No assistant announcing him. Just Richard in a navy suit, standing between storage carts and metal shelving. Several employees slowed down. Richard ignored the attention. "Annie." She set down the linen. "Mr. Whitmore, could I talk to you?" Samuel picked up another stack. "I suddenly have work somewhere else." Annie waited until he moved away. "How's Victoria?" "Awake. Complaining. Which I'm taking as a good sign." Annie smiled. "That's good." Richard looked around at the service corridor. He had attended events at the Grand Marlowe for years, yet he had never seen this side of the hotel. Employees ate quick meals beside lockers. Coffee sat in paper cups near time clocks. Shoes were lined beneath benches where workers changed before their shifts. "You work back here every week?" "Sometimes 3 events a week." Richard looked at her hands. "Do they hurt?" "A little. My sister's doctor said the CPR gave her a chance." Annie lowered her eyes. "I helped until the paramedics got there." "You keep making it sound smaller." She looked back at him. "Because telling the truth doesn't require making yourself bigger." Richard absorbed that. Then he said, "The toxicology test was confirmed." Annie stopped breathing for half a second. "They found something?" "Yes." "Was she poisoned?" "We don't know enough to say exactly how it happened yet." Annie nodded. That careful answer sounded like Morales. Richard continued. "The cameras also show Keller walking past the AED before the gala." Annie's expression hardened. So he knew. He knew where it was. For a moment neither spoke. Then Richard's phone rang. "Morales." He answered. "What did you find?" Her voice came through faintly. Victoria's financial concerns were justified. "We traced several foundation payments to medical vendors that don't appear to operate where they claim." Richard's face changed. "How much?" "Enough that I don't want anyone at the foundation warned yet." "And Keller?" "One of the vendors carries approvals connected to him." Richard looked at Annie. Morales continued. "Mr. Whitmore, this may be bigger than an attempt to hurt your sister." Richard's grip tightened around the phone. "How much bigger?" "We're about to find out." Richard ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. But the look on his face had changed enough that Annie noticed. What did she mean by bigger? Richard glanced toward the service entrance. Several companies received money from the Whitmore Health Foundation. Detective Morales says some of them may not be real businesses. "How much money?" "I don't know yet." Annie studied him. "And Dr. Keller signed something?" "Approvals connected to one of them." Samuel Reed passed at the far end of the corridor carrying folded tablecloths, saw the expression on Richard's face, and wisely kept walking. Annie lowered her voice. "Was Victoria looking into those companies?" "Yes." "Before the gala?" "Yes." She took a second to connect the facts. Then maybe what happened to her wasn't only about hurting her. Richard's eyes settled on her. It may have been about stopping her. Neither needed to say Keller's name. Richard left the hotel and drove directly to Memorial Hermann. Victoria had been moved out of intensive monitoring, though leads still crossed beneath the neckline of her hospital gown and a cardiac monitor remained beside her bed. She was sitting up when he entered, picking at a bowl of chicken soup. "You look disappointed," she said. "I expected you to be resting. I expected hospital soup to have flavor. We're both learning." Richard pulled a chair closer. Morales found the vendors. Victoria set down her spoon. "How many?" "More than one." Her humor disappeared. "I knew it. Start at the beginning." Victoria reached for a folder on the tray beside her. The foundation funds community clinics, mobile screenings, equipment grants, rural health programs, normal things. 6 months ago, I noticed the same billing patterns showing up under different company names. "How much?" At first, a few $100,000. Richard's eyebrows lifted. Victoria gave him a tired look. "I know how ridiculous that sounds in our family. It sounds like money. That's my point." She opened the folder. Then I found more. Different vendors, different addresses. But the invoices were formatted almost exactly the same. Same wording, same rounding patterns. Some of the listed clinics didn't have functioning websites. One address belonged to an empty office suite. Richard took the papers. "And nobody in finance caught this?" Someone either missed it or didn't want to catch it. His eyes moved down the page. A familiar name appeared beneath a medical certification. Adrian Keller, MD. Richard stopped. Victoria watched him. "Now you see why I wanted to talk before the gala. How many documents did he sign?" "At least 9 that I found." Richard turned another page. Keller had sat at family dinners. He had attended fundraisers where Richard publicly praised physicians who served people without access to care. Now his signature appeared beneath invoices that may have drained money from those same programs. Richard closed the folder. "I'm going to have every account frozen." "No." He looked at Victoria. "No? Morales told you not to touch anything, didn't she?" Richard said nothing. Victoria smiled faintly. "That means yes. These are our accounts. And now some of them are evidence." Richard got up and paced 2 steps before stopping himself. "I don't like sitting here while people steal from us. They didn't just steal from us." Victoria's voice sharpened. "That foundation paid for mammograms, heart screenings, transportation to clinics, prescriptions people couldn't afford. If these invoices are fake, every dollar Keller took came from something real." Richard looked back at the papers. That landed differently. His phone rang. Morales. "We verified another vendor," she said as soon as he answered. "The listed clinic address is a commercial mailbox." Richard walked toward the window. "And Keller?" "His signature appears on certifications tied to 2 more payments." "How much?" "We're still totaling it." "Millions?" A brief pause. "Possibly." Richard looked at Victoria. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. Especially no calls to foundation employees unless we coordinate them. You really enjoy telling me what not to do." "I enjoy keeping cases intact." Despite everything, Victoria gave a small smile. Richard ended the call 20 minutes later with a list of documents investigators wanted preserved. That evening, he drove to Annie's neighborhood. He had asked his assistant for her address, then dismissed the suggestion that someone else deliver what he carried. Annie opened the door wearing jeans and a faded Houston Community College t-shirt. "Mr. Whitmore? I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." From behind Annie came Lillian's voice. "If you are, he can eat." Annie turned. "Mom, what?" "I made enough." Richard almost smiled. Lillian appeared near the kitchen entrance, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mr. Whitmore." "Mrs. Carter." "Miss Carter is fine." "Yes, ma'am." Dinner smelled of roast chicken, green beans, and cornbread. Richard realized he had eaten nothing since morning. Lillian pointed toward a chair. "You came all the way here. Sit down before you make me nervous standing there in that suit." Richard obeyed. Annie looked suspicious. "Why are you here?" Richard took an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "To thank you." Annie did not touch it. "What is it?" "A check." "How much?" "Enough to help." That answer made her expression change. Richard added, "Your mother told me you're applying to an EMT program. There's tuition, transportation, whatever you need." Annie looked at the envelope, then at him. "You need to take that back." Richard blinked. Excuse me? I can't accept it. Why not? Because Dr. Keller has lawyers. Richard leaned back slightly. Annie continued. They already say I'm confused. What happens when they find out the billionaire whose sister I'm accusing gave me a giant check? You're not accusing him. You're a witness. That won't matter in a headline. Lillian remained by the counter, listening. Richard said, This has nothing to do with your statement. I believe you. Then what's the problem? Annie pushed the envelope toward him. The problem is other people don't have to. Richard looked at the check. She was right. He hated that she was right. I could put it through an attorney. No. A scholarship fund. No. An education trust. Annie almost laughed. You really don't hear no much, do you? Not when I'm trying to give someone money. That sounds like a rich person problem. Lillian covered a smile with her hand. Richard looked from mother to daughter. All right. He picked up the envelope. Not now. Annie nodded. Not now. Lillian finally spoke. Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Richard turned toward her. But my daughter's name is worth more than a check. Richard held her gaze. Yes, ma'am. The answer came without hesitation. For several moments, the only sound came from the silverware Lillian had set beside the plates. Then Annie asked, How is Victoria? Better. She's already arguing with me. Good. She also told us why she was investigating those accounts. Annie waited. Richard explained the false clinics, repeated invoices, and Keller's signatures. When he finished, Annie sat back. So she found out someone was stealing from the foundation. It looks that way. And Keller knew she was checking. We think he may have. Annie rubbed her palms together. The soreness from CPR almost gone now. So if Victoria had died at the gala, Richard finished the thought. The audit might have stopped with her. Lillian looked between them. That doctor has known your family a long time? Almost 10 years. And you trusted him? With everything. Lillian shook her head slowly. People confuse access with loyalty. Richard looked at her. She continued. Somebody knowing where you keep the coffee doesn't mean they'd protect your house when it burns. Annie glanced at her mother. That was dramatic. It was accurate. Richard gave a quiet laugh, then grew serious again. The next morning, Morales called with another update. Investigators had identified 5 questionable vendors. 3 shared financial connections. 2 had never treated a single patient they could verify. And 1 name appeared repeatedly in the paperwork beside Keller's. Douglas Vane. Richard knew him. A healthcare management executive. A donor. A man who had sat less than 20 feet from Victoria the night she collapsed. Morales asked, Do you trust him? Richard looked at Keller's signatures spread across his desk. Yesterday I would have answered that quickly. And today? Richard closed the folder. Today I'd rather see the evidence. By noon, Douglas Vane's name had moved from a spreadsheet to the center of the investigation. Morales had warned Richard not to contact him, so Richard did the one thing that still felt unnatural. Nothing. He stayed at his office, sent every requested document to investigators, and watched people he had known for years become names on evidence lists. The harder part came when local television picked up Keller's side of the story. A statement from his attorney appeared first. Dr. Adrian Keller has spent more than 3 decades caring for patients and strongly denies any suggestion that he harmed Victoria Whitmore. During the medical emergency, an untrained teenage employee interfered with his efforts to evaluate his patient. Annie heard the statement while folding napkins before an evening banquet. Samuel Reed lowered the volume on the small television in the staff area. That's convenient. Annie kept working. What is? He gets to be Dr. Keller. You get to be an untrained teenage employee. He is a doctor. Samuel looked at her. And you have a name. Before Annie could answer, the television switched to a reporter standing outside the Grand Marlowe. Questions remain about whether Annie Carter, the banquet worker seen performing CPR, misunderstood the actions of an experienced physician. Annie stopped folding. The reporter continued. Dr. Keller's legal team says Carter may have interpreted ordinary medical decision-making as interference during a chaotic emergency. Samuel muted the television. Annie put the napkin down. Ordinary medical decision-making? Don't watch this. They're talking about me. That doesn't mean you have to help them do it. Her phone vibrated. A producer from a local station had left another message asking for an interview. 2 reporters had called that morning. A third had sent an email offering to give Annie the opportunity to tell her side. She hated that phrase, as if Victoria's heart-stopping had become a debate. Later that afternoon, Annie agreed to answer 3 questions outside the hotel because Morales had told her she could speak publicly as long as she avoided discussing evidence that had not been released. The first question was simple. How is Victoria? I'm told she's recovering. The second reporter asked, do you consider yourself a hero? No. Why not? Because I wasn't alone. The dispatcher helped me. The paramedics took over. The hospital kept her alive after that. Then a man pushed his microphone closer. Annie, do you really believe you knew better than a physician with 30 years of experience? She looked at him. I knew she wasn't responding normally, and I knew where the AED was. But Dr. Keller says you misunderstood what he was doing. I know what I saw. Which was? He tried to stop me from calling 911. The reporter pushed again. But you're not medically trained at his level. No. So why challenge him? Annie felt heat move through her chest. Because Victoria was dying. Because Keller had lied. Because everyone had been prepared to trust his jacket, his title, his age, before they trusted what was happening directly in front of them. She chose her words carefully. I didn't need 30 years of medical school to know we shouldn't stand there and watch her die. The clip spread within an hour. Most people praised her. Some did not. One commentator called her remarkably confident for someone with no professional license. Another said she had been too aggressive during the emergency. Annie sat at the kitchen table that night, scrolling until Lillian reached over and took the phone from her hand. Enough. Mum. No. They're saying I wanted attention. And now you're giving them yours. Annie leaned forward and covered her face. I keep thinking if I had spoken softer, maybe none of this would be happening. Lillian sat beside her. If you had spoken softer, Victoria might not have heard another morning. Annie looked up. That doesn't make this easy. I didn't say it did. Lillian put the phone face down. Being brave in public doesn't mean you owe the world bravery in your own kitchen. You can be angry here. You can be tired here. You don't have to perform courage for me. Annie's eyes filled. For several minutes, she said nothing. Across Houston, Richard was hearing a different version of the same argument. One of his senior communications advisors stood across from his desk. We should control Annie's media exposure. Richard looked up. Why? She's young. She gets emotional. That can play badly. Richard lowered the document in his hand. Emotional? You know what I mean. No. Explain it. The advisor shifted. She raises her voice. She challenges reporters. Keller's team could use that. Richard thought of Annie on her knees performing CPR, while everyone else waited for someone more important to act. Would you describe a 50-year-old male physician as emotional if he raised his voice during a cardiac arrest? The advisor did not answer. Richard leaned back. I asked you a question. Probably not. Then don't use the word for hair. The advisor nodded once. After he left, Morales called. I heard about the interview. So did half of Texas. She handled herself fine. My people think she should stay off television. Your people also work for you. Richard understood the point. Morales continued. Don't turn Annie into the face of a crusade. She's a witness, not a weapon. I'm trying to protect her. Then let her tell the truth without building a campaign around her. Richard looked out across downtown Houston. Justice moves slowly. It has to. That doesn't make it fair. Morales gave a tired sigh. Justice gets into trouble when rich men decide their anger is the same thing as proof. Richard almost smiled. You enjoy saying things I don't like. I enjoy you listening anyway. That evening, Annie received a call from Victoria. Am I catching you at a bad time? Annie sat straighter. Miss Whitmore? Victoria. How are you feeling? Like I lost a fight with a truck, but apparently that's progress. Annie laughed despite herself. Victoria's voice softened. I saw the interview. I probably shouldn't have done it. No, I'm glad you did. Annie waited. Victoria continued. There's something I wanted to tell you. Before all this, I probably walked past you 3 times that night. You were hosting a gala. That isn't an excuse. Annie didn't respond. Victoria said, I knew the names of donors who wrote 6-figure checks. I knew the doctors, the board members, but I didn't know yours. You know it now? Yes. A pause. I'm sorry. Annie looked toward the dark television, then remember the next person's. Victoria let out a quiet breath. I will. Before ending the call, she added, my brother told me the investigators found another name connected to the foundation payments. Douglas Vane? Victoria went quiet. You already heard? Richard mentioned there was someone else. Victoria lowered her voice. I know him. He runs a healthcare management company. He's been around our foundation for years. After the call, Annie sat thinking about that. At the hospital, Victoria opened the spreadsheet on her laptop and showed Richard one of the final payment chains she had saved. There, Richard followed the line across several columns. Avendur, a consulting company. A management firm. Douglas Vane. Richard's expression tightened. Victoria pointed to another file. This photo was attached to the gala seating plan. Richard opened it. Table 12. Keller sat near the center. Douglas Vane was 2 seats away. Richard picked up his phone and called Morales. I think you need to see who was sitting with Keller the night Victoria collapsed. Morales answered, Send it. Richard looked again at the names around that table. For the first time, the gala no longer looked like the place where the conspiracy began. It looked like the place where several people who already shared a secret had gathered under the same lights. Morales received the seating chart before midnight. By 7 the next morning, investigators had already begun mapping Douglas Vane's connections to the companies Victoria had flagged. Richard was at the hospital when Morales called. We found 3 vendors linked to Vane through management agreements, she said. Different names, different mailing addresses, but the same accounting firm appears underneath them. And Keller? His approvals show up where medical services had to be certified. Richard stood near Victoria's window, watching Houston traffic move below. So Vane moved the money and Keller made the paperwork look legitimate. That's one possibility. You always say that. Because possibilities don't go to prison, evidence does. Richard rubbed his forehead. Where is Vane now? At home, according to his attorney. His attorney? He hired one before we contacted him. Richard turned from the window. That doesn't sound innocent. It doesn't sound useful either. Let us do our job. Victoria sat upright in bed with a laptop open across her knees. Once Richard ended the call, she said, You're making that face again. What face? The one where you think having more money than everybody else means you should be allowed to skip procedure. Richard pulled a chair closer. I'm trying to understand how I signed off on grants connected to this. You approved budgets. You didn't approve fake clinics. I approved the system they used. Victoria closed the laptop. That still doesn't make you Keller. No, it made Keller's job easier. She studied him for a moment. Richard picked up one of the printed invoices. I spent 30 years building companies where I thought I knew who had access to what. Then a man sits at my dinner table, treats my family, shakes my hand at Christmas, and apparently uses my foundation like a private bank. Victoria's voice softened. You trusted him. That isn't an excuse. No. But it explains why betrayal works. Richard looked at her. She continued. People don't betray strangers, Richard. They betray people who open the door. He lowered the invoice. For once, he did not have a response. Later that morning, Victoria showed Morales a folder she had created weeks before the gala. Inside were screenshots, invoice comparisons, and notes from calls with clinics that claimed they had never received the grants listed under their names. Morales asked, Why didn't you bring this to law enforcement? I wasn't sure it was criminal. I thought it could be terrible accounting. And when did you stop thinking that? When companies started disappearing after I asked questions. Morales looked up. Disappearing? Websites went offline. Phone numbers stopped working. One vendor suddenly filed dissolution papers. Richard leaned forward. You never told me that. I tried to tell you. The words hit him harder the second time. Morales noticed, but kept going. Did Keller know you were looking? Victoria hesitated. I confronted him about 2 certifications. What did he say? That foundation accounting wasn't my field and I was seeing patterns because I was tired. Morales made a note. Did he know you planned an outside audit? I told him Friday afternoon. The gala had been Saturday night. Richard's face tightened. Morales asked, Who else knew? Finance counsel. My assistant. Douglas Vane. Richard looked at Victoria. Why Vane? He called after hearing I'd requested records from one of his management companies. He said I was creating unnecessary alarm. What exactly did you tell him? That the audit would start Monday. Nobody spoke for a moment. Morales closed the folder. That changes the timeline. Across Houston, Annie was sitting in an information session at Houston Community College, trying unsuccessfully to forget the cameras outside the Grand Marlowe. A program advisor named Carol Bennett stood at the front explaining EMT coursework. clinical requirements, schedules, and certification exams. Annie had attended because she refused to let Keller's name occupy every part of her life. After the session, Carol approached her. "You're Annie Carter." Annie gave a tired smile. Apparently that's how introductions work now. Carol caught herself. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "It's okay. I saw the footage." "So did everybody." Carol nodded toward Annie's application folder. "You still planning to apply?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Annie looked at her. "You don't think what happened changes anything?" "It changes one night of your life. It doesn't finish the rest of it." Annie glanced down at the folder. Carol continued. "People are going to want to turn you into either a hero or a mistake, because both versions fit into a headline. Don't let either one choose your career." That stayed with Annie as she walked toward the parking lot. Her fingers slipped into her jacket pocket and found the old wristwatch she carried there. The leather strap was worn, and the hands had stopped years ago. She rarely took it out, but that morning she held it for several seconds before putting it away again. A phone call interrupted her. "Victoria, am I bothering you?" "No. I was at an EMT information session. That sounds more interesting than my morning." "How are you?" "Better. Richard is arguing with 3 people at once, which means he's recovering too." Annie laughed. Then Victoria grew serious. "The investigators think Keller and Douglas Vane may have been working together." "The man from the seating chart?" "Yes." "Do they know why?" "They think money is part of it." Annie waited. Victoria said, "I told them I was starting an outside audit Monday." Annie stopped walking. "And you told Keller before the gala?" "Yes." "When?" "Friday." Annie looked across the parking lot without really seeing it. "So he knew you were about to find something." "We don't know that for sure." "That sounds like Detective Morales." "I'm learning." The call ended shortly afterward. That afternoon, Morales received the first digital recovery report from a Foundation server. One deleted message had been partially reconstructed from a backup. It was not from Keller. It came from an account associated with Vane's office. The message contained no direct threat. Only one line mattered. "VW is pushing the audit. Monday changes everything." Morales read it twice before calling Richard. "This is what we've been missing. Proof? Not of poisoning. Proof that people connected to the money knew Victoria was about to expose something." Richard's voice lowered. "How close does that get us?" "Closer." The answer was not enough for him, but he had finally learned not to demand a different one. That evening, Keller appeared outside his attorney's office for the first time since the gala. Television crews surrounded him. He wore a dark suit and spoke without raising his voice. "I have spent more than 30 years caring for people. A medical emergency has been turned into a public accusation, fueled by fear, money, and incomplete information." A reporter called out, "Did you try to prevent Annie Carter from calling 911? My actions have been misrepresented. Did you know where the AED was?" Keller's attorney stepped forward, but Keller continued. "What happened to Victoria Whitmore was frightening. That does not justify turning an experienced physician into the target of a witch hunt." Annie watched from her mother's sofa. She had heard Keller sound angry before. This was worse. He sounded reasonable. The television showed comments from people already defending him, citing his career and reputation. Annie reached for the remote and turned the screen off. Lillian looked over from the kitchen. "You okay?" Annie took a moment before answering. "No." It was the first time she said it without trying to make the word smaller. Because Keller was no longer only the man who had tried to pull her away from Victoria. He was a man with lawyers, credentials, supporters, and 30 years of people ready to believe him. And Annie was beginning to understand that doing the right thing once had been the easy part. Now she had to keep telling the truth while someone far more powerful worked to make the truth sound like a mistake. The first call came just after midnight. Annie's phone vibrated against the kitchen table while she was helping Lillian put away the last dishes. The number was blocked. She answered anyway. "Hello?" "Nothing." "Hello?" A faint breath came through the speaker. Then the call ended. Lillian looked over. "Who was it?" "No idea." "Wrong number?" "Maybe." The second call came 20 minutes later. Blocked again. This time Annie did not answer. By morning there were 3 more missed calls and 1 voicemail containing nothing except several seconds of background noise. Lillian listened once, deleted it, then placed the phone on the counter. "You're changing your number." "Mom, I can't." "Detective Morales, the college work. They can get the new one." It might just be people from the news. And that makes it better? Annie reached for the phone, but Lillian kept her hand over it. I'm serious. So am I. I can't disappear every time somebody tries to scare me. Lillian's expression tightened. You already saved that woman. I know. Then let the police handle the rest. Annie looked away. Lillian lowered her voice. I need you to understand something. I'm proud of what you did. That does not mean I'm willing to watch you become the next person somebody decides is in the way. Before Annie could answer, a car horn sounded outside. Both women turned toward the front window. A dark SUV was parked across the street. The engine was running. Annie watched for a few seconds, then moved away from the glass. Has that been there before? Lillian asked. I saw one like it yesterday. That is not an answer I wanted. I don't know if it's the same one. Call Detective Morales. Mom, call her. Annie did. Morales arrived 40 minutes later with a patrol officer. By then the SUV was gone. She stood near the front steps while the officer checked nearby cameras and spoke with neighbors. Did you get a plate? Annie shook her head. No, ma'am. Make model? Dark SUV. Maybe black. Maybe navy. How long was it there? I don't know, 10 minutes? Morales wrote it down. Lillian crossed her arms. And the calls? I'm having those documented too. Annie asked. Do you think Keller sent somebody? Morales closed her notebook. I think we don't know who made the calls or why that vehicle was there. That sounds like you're saying no. It sounds like I'm refusing to invent an answer. Annie exhaled. Morales softened slightly. That doesn't mean we ignore it. Save every message. Don't confront anyone. If you see the vehicle again, call us. Lillian asked, Can you protect her? We can increase patrol presence. Mr. Whitmore has also offered private security. Annie turned sharply. He did what? Morales almost smiled. I told him I'd ask you before he surrounded your block with men in suits. I don't want bodyguards. Lillian replied, I do. Mum, pride does not lock a front door. Annie looked at Morales. What would it actually mean? One plainclothes security professional nearby when you travel to work or official interviews. Nothing dramatic. Annie hated the idea. She hated more that her mother looked genuinely frightened. All right, temporary. Morales nodded. Temporary. Richard arrived later that afternoon, alone except for the security driver who remained outside. Annie met him on the front steps. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. No, you wanted to. Richard accepted the correction. Fine. I wanted to. Annie glanced toward the street. You think Keller is behind the calls? I think Keller has money, lawyers, and reasons to want you doubted. That's not what I asked. No, I don't know. Annie folded her arms. Richard continued. What I do know is that you shouldn't have to think about who is parked outside your home because you called 911. She gave him a tired look. People say things like that when something ugly finally reaches someone they can see. Richard frowned. What does that mean? It means bad things don't suddenly start existing because rich people notice them. He took that in without defending himself. A pickup truck stopped nearby. Samuel Reed climbed out carrying a toolbox. Annie blinked. Mr. Reed? He pointed toward the porch. Your mother said that light hasn't worked right for a month. You drove over here to fix a porch light? I drove over here because people should be able to see who's walking up to their own front door. Behind him came Mrs. Evelyn Jackson from 2 houses down, carrying a foil-covered dish. I brought peach cobbler. Annie put a hand over her face. Please tell me everybody didn't have a meeting about me. Evelyn handed the dish to Lillian, who had come outside. Honey, this neighborhood has meetings about everybody. Yours just had better refreshments. That finally pulled a laugh from Annie. Within half an hour, Samuel was replacing the porch fixture. Evelyn was in the kitchen arguing with Lillian about whether the cobbler needed ice cream, and another neighbor had offered to check the outside camera over his garage. Richard stood near the steps watching people arrive without being asked twice. Samuel climbed down from the ladder and noticed him. You're the billionaire. Richard extended a hand. Richard Whitmore. Samuel shook it. Samuel Reed. Richard gestured toward the new light. Thank you for helping. Samuel shrugged. Money can hire a man to stand at a door. It can't make the people inside worth coming home to. Richard looked toward Annie and Lillian through the open doorway. No, he said. It can't. That evening Morales called Annie again. I need you tomorrow for another formal interview. Keller's attorneys will be present. Annie sat at the kitchen table. What are they going to ask? Anything that helps them make you sound uncertain. I am uncertain about some things. That's fine. It is? A witness doesn't owe us a perfect story. She owes us an honest one. Annie rubbed her thumb along the edge of her phone. What if I don't remember everything exactly? Say that. What if they ask whether I think Keller poisoned Victoria? Tell them what you actually know. Annie nodded even though Morales could not see her. The next morning, Keller's attorney sat across from Annie at a long conference table and began with a smile that never reached his eyes. Miss Carter, I'd like to establish something very simple. You are not a doctor, correct? No. You're not a nurse. No. You've never attended medical school. No. So when you told emergency services that Victoria Whitmore may have been given something, you were making a medical diagnosis. Annie shook her head. No. The attorney glanced at his notes. You weren't? I told them what I saw. And what exactly did you see? I saw Miss Whitmore collapse. I saw Dr. Keller try to stop me from calling 911. I heard him say there was no AED on the floor when I knew there was, and I saw a mark on her arm after I had seen him give her something earlier. The attorney tapped his pen. So you concluded he poisoned her? No. His expression shifted. No? I concluded something was wrong. Then perhaps you were confused. Maybe about some details. The attorney almost smiled. Annie continued before he could speak. But I wasn't confused when he grabbed my wrist. I wasn't confused when he called security to pull me away. And I wasn't confused when the 911 dispatcher told me to keep doing the exact thing he wanted me to stop doing. The attorney's pen stopped moving. For the first time since the questioning began, Annie understood something important. She did not have to defeat Keller's lawyers. She did not have to explain the whole conspiracy. She only had to keep telling the truth exactly as she knew it. And that was much harder for them to take away. When the interview ended, Annie walked out of the conference area with her shoulders tight and her mouth dry. Morales followed a few steps behind, carrying a folder under one arm. You did fine. Annie gave her a doubtful look. He spent an hour trying to make me say I didn't know anything. That was the point. I almost gave him what he wanted. No, you admitted what you didn't know. That's different. Annie stopped near the elevator. He kept asking the same questions. Because people get tired. I was tired. Exactly. Morales pressed the elevator button. He wanted you frustrated enough to start filling gaps. You didn't. Annie looked down at her hands. I kept thinking about that night. Every time he asked if I was sure, I started wondering if maybe I remembered something wrong. That happens. So what if I did? Then say so when you find it. The elevator doors opened. Morales stepped inside with her. People think a strong witness never doubts herself. That's nonsense. A strong witness knows the difference between memory and invention. Annie nodded, though she was still processing it. When the doors opened on the lobby level, Richard was waiting near the entrance. Annie frowned. You were here? I had another meeting with investigators. Morales gave him a look. And you were not waiting outside the interview. I know. That sounded defensive. It was meant to. Annie almost smiled. Richard turned to her. How did it go? Your sister's doctor has expensive lawyers. I noticed. They wanted me to say I diagnosed poisoning. Did you? No. Good. Annie crossed her arms. You sound disappointed. I'm relieved. If you had tried to prove more than you knew, they would have used it. She looked at him. You're learning. Richard gave Morales an annoyed glance. Apparently, everyone has decided to educate me. Morales walked past them. It's overdue. Richard watched her go, then turned back to Annie. Victoria asked about you. How is she? Better. She walked the length of the hospital corridor this morning and complained the entire time. That sounds promising. It was irritating. That also sounds promising. Richard smiled. Later that afternoon, Annie visited Victoria for the first time since the gala. Victoria was sitting in a chair near the window, wearing a cardigan over her hospital clothes. A monitor remained nearby, but she looked more like herself than Annie expected. There she is, Victoria said, the woman who keeps refusing my brother's money. Annie stopped halfway to the chair. He told you? He tells me everything after pretending he doesn't. Richard, standing near the window, shook his head. That is not true. Victoria ignored him. Sit. I'm tired of looking at people from hospital beds. Annie sat across from her. Victoria studied her hands. Do they still hurt? Not much. Minedo. Annie's face changed. Victoria noticed. That was a joke. It wasn't funny. I've been here too long. My standards are collapsing. Richard said. That happened years ago. Victoria pointed at the door. You can leave. For the first time since the gala, Annie saw them as a brother and sister rather than a billionaire and the woman everyone wanted to interview. Victoria looked back at Annie. Did the lawyers give you a hard time? They tried. They do that for a living. I know. Victoria's voice softened. Thank you for going through it. Annie shook her head. You don't have to thank me every time. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. Victoria smiled. All right, then I'll save some for later. A nurse entered to check the monitor, and Annie moved her chair aside. Richard watched Victoria make another joke about hospital food, then looked down at his phone when a message arrived. The change in his expression was immediate. Victoria noticed. What? Richard did not answer right away. Morales says they lost access to one of the financial servers. Victoria sat straighter. Lost access how? A remote administrator account was used before investigators locked everything down. Files were deleted. Which files? They don't know yet. Annie looked between them. Can they recover them? Richard answered, maybe. Victoria's mouth tightened. Douglas Vane. We don't know. You think Keller did it? We don't know that either. Victoria looked frustrated. That phrase is becoming very popular. Annie gave her a tired smile. Detective Morales likes it. Richard's phone rang before anyone could say more. He answered, Morales. Victoria and Annie both watched him. His expression hardened as he listened. When? A pause. Since this morning? Another pause. No, I haven't contacted him. He ended the call. Victoria asked, what happened? Vane is gone. Annie leaned forward. Gone where? No one knows. His attorney says he's unavailable. His office says he hasn't been in. His phone is off. Victoria whispered. He ran. Richard looked at her. That's what it looks like. The investigation had moved forward for days. Now, in less than one afternoon, a server had been partially wiped, and a man tied to the money had disappeared. Annie felt something cold settle in her stomach. What if they destroy everything? Richard did not answer. Victoria looked toward the monitor beside her. If Keller survives this because the records disappear, he won't. Richard's response was immediate. Annie turned to him. You don't know that. Richard's jaw tightened. No, it cost him something to admit it. That evening, Morales asked Annie to come to the Grand Marlowe again. We're reviewing the gala footage frame by frame. I thought you already had. We reviewed the important parts. Now we're reviewing everything around them. Annie sat beside Morales while a technician moved through multiple angles. They watched Keller before Victoria collapsed. Keller after. Richard running for the AED. Security holding Keller. Paramedics arriving. Then Morales said, keep going. The footage showed Keller speaking to a guard while Victoria was being moved toward the exit. Annie watched without much interest at first. Then Keller's right hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Annie straightened. Wait. The technician paused. What? Go back. The image reversed several seconds. Again, Keller's hand disappeared inside his jacket. Then came out empty. Annie leaned closer. Morales asked, what are you seeing? I remember that. Remember what? He put something in his pocket before. Before when? Before he tried to pull me away. I saw his hand go inside his jacket. Morales looked at the screen. Could have been anything. I know. Do you remember what? No. The technician advanced the footage. Keller left the ballroom under supervision for several minutes before officers formally separated the witnesses. Annie pointed. Where did he go? The technician switched cameras. Keller moved down a side corridor, then entered a restroom. Annie felt her pulse quicken. Morales did not react outwardly. Show me when he comes out. 30 seconds. Forte. Then Keller reappeared. Annie looked at his jacket. The pocket sat flatter than before. She turned to Morales. He had something when he went in. Morales kept her eyes on the screen. And when he came out? Annie swallowed. I don't think he did. Morales did not take her eyes off the monitor. Show me the restroom entrance from every available angle. The technician opened 2 additional camera feeds. One showed Keller entering the side corridor. Another caught part of the service hallway near the restroom doors. Neither camera could see inside, but together they established the timing. Keller entered at 14 p.m. He came out less than a minute later. Morales pointed to the screen. Freeze it there. The technician stopped the image. Keller adjusted his jacket as he stepped back into the hallway. Annie moved closer to the monitor, comparing the shape of the inside pocket before and after he disappeared into the restroom. "I know it isn't proof," she said. "No," Morales replied, "but it tells us where to look." Annie turned toward her. Would anything still be there? After this many days? Probably not. The answer disappointed her, but Morales was already reaching for her phone. Still worth checking. She called the hotel facilities manager and asked for cleaning records from the night of the gala. Within half an hour, a gray-haired man named Howard Price arrived carrying a binder and wearing the expression of someone who had been pulled into a police investigation after expecting to spend his evening discussing linen inventory. Morales asked, "Who cleaned that restroom after the event?" Howard flipped through the pages. "Evening crew. Rosa Delgado signed this section. What happened to the waste? Housekeeping bags it, takes it to the service level, then it goes into the compactor. When? Usually overnight." Annie's hope dropped. Morales kept going. "Usually?" Howard stopped turning pages. "There was a maintenance issue that night." "What kind?" "The main compactor jammed around 10:30. Facilities shut it down." Morales looked at him. "So where did the trash go?" "Secondary holding." "For how long?" "Until the morning pickup." "When was that?" Howard frowned and checked another sheet. "Not all of it went out. Looks like the contractor skipped part of the load because the compactor repair crew blocked access." Morales stood. "Where would the remaining bags be now? If they weren't moved later?" "Storage bay 3. Annie's heart began beating faster. Howard lifted a hand. "I'm not promising anything. Those bags could have been mixed with half the hotel." "We don't need a promise," Morales said. "We need access." The search began that night under police supervision. Annie was sent home before investigators entered the service storage area. She objected once. Morales pointed toward the exit. "You helped us find the lead. Now go home." "What if you find something?" "I have your number." "What if you don't?" "I still have your number." Annie knew better than to argue. At home, Lillian had left the porch light on. Samuel's new fixture cast a wide circle across the steps, bright enough that Annie could see the empty street before unlocking the door. Her mother was waiting at the kitchen table. "Well?" "They're searching the hotel trash." Lillian blinked. "That is not the sentence I expected to hear tonight." Annie dropped into the chair across from her. "They think Keller may have thrown something away." "Do they know what?" "No." "So now we wait." "I hate waiting." "I noticed." Lillian pushed a mug toward her. "What's this?" "Tea." "I don't want tea. You also said you weren't hungry 3 nights in a row, and yet food keeps disappearing from this house." Annie wrapped both hands around the mug. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it immediately. Not Morales. A news notification. Dr. Adrian Keller had agreed to his first extended television interview. Annie almost closed it, then tapped the video. Keller sat across from a local anchor wearing a charcoal suit and a pale blue tie. His posture was controlled. His voice measured. "I have spent more than 30 years caring for people during the worst moments of their lives." The anchor asked, "Did you try to prevent Annie Carter from performing CPR?" "I tried to prevent an untrained employee from making decisions beyond her expertise. But the 911 recording indicates the dispatcher instructed her to continue." Keller nodded slightly. "And once emergency services were involved, the situation changed." Annie shook her head. "That's not what happened." Lillian reached for the phone. Annie pulled it away. "I want to hear him," Keller continued. "I believe Miss Carter acted with good intentions. I do not blame her. She was frightened, inexperienced, and placed in a situation she could not fully understand." Annie's jaw tightened. There it was again. Not an attack. Something worse. Permission to dismiss her while pretending to be kind. The anchor asked, "Did you know where the AED was located?" "I did not recall the location during a medical emergency. Security footage shows you walking directly past it earlier that evening." "I walk past hundreds of objects in a hotel. I don't memorize each one." Lillian reached over and shut off the video. "Enough. He makes me sound stupid." "No. He makes himself sound reasonable." "That's worse." "Yes." Annie looked at her mother. Lillian sat beside her. "Then don't let him decide what kind of person you become." "What does that mean?" "It means you don't go on television tomorrow and try to beat him at being angry." "I wasn't planning to." "You were thinking about it." Annie looked away. Lillian continued. "That man has had 30 years to practice being important. You don't need to compete with that." You already have the truth. Across Houston, Richard watched the same interview in Victoria's hospital suite. When Keller described Annie as inexperienced, Richard reached for his phone. Victoria noticed. "Who are you calling?" "My communications director." "For what?" "To answer him." "With what?" "Everything we know." Victoria shook her head. "No." Richard turned toward her. "He is lying on television, and if you release evidence before Morales is ready, his lawyers will say you poisoned the investigation. I can destroy his reputation by breakfast." "That is exactly why you shouldn't." Richard stood and walked toward the window. Victoria watched him. "You want revenge." "I want him stopped." "No, you want him humiliated." Richard did not deny it. Victoria lowered her voice. "If Keller did this, then let the evidence take his name away. Don't give him a reason to say you bought the ending." Richard's phone remained in his hand for several seconds. Then he put it down. Justice doesn't feel very fair when the guilty man can afford more patience than the people he hurt. Victoria adjusted the blanket across her knees. "Then we'll have to be more patient than he is." The call from Morales came shortly after 6 the next morning. Annie answered before the second ring. "Did you find something?" "We found several bags from the restroom service zone." "Several?" "Don't get excited." "I'm not." "You sound excited." "I'm awake." Morales ignored that. "One bag was logged from the same cleaning route used after Keller went into that restroom." Annie sat up. "And?" "We found a small, discarded medical item inside." Her breath stopped for a moment. "Was it his?" "We don't know yet." "Does it have anything on it?" "Forensics will tell us." "How long?" "Long enough that calling me every 10 minutes won't help." Annie closed her eyes. "Okay." Morales' tone softened. "You did good noticing the pocket." "I almost didn't." "But you did." The call ended. At the police evidence facility, the item was sealed, documented, and sent for forensic examination. Nobody celebrated. Not Morales, not Richard, not Annie. There was still no guarantee that it connected Keller to Victoria. But for the first time since Vane disappeared and the financial server was damaged, the investigation had something new to hold on to. Something Keller may have thought he had thrown away. And unlike a television interview, it had no reputation to protect, no lawyer speaking for it, and no reason to care whether anyone considered Annie Carter important enough to believe. The forensic report reached Morales just after lunch the next day. She read it once at her desk, then again before picking up the phone. The discarded medical item recovered from the Grand Marlow carried residue consistent with the same pharmaceutical agent identified in Victoria Whitmore's toxicology tests. Investigators had also recovered trace evidence that connected the item to Keller strongly enough for prosecutors to move forward with the next stage of the case. Morales called Richard first. He answered immediately. "What did they find?" "The item from the hotel contained residue matching what was detected in Victoria." Richard did not speak. Morales continued. "I need you to hear the rest before you start making calls. This is not one piece of evidence proving the entire case." "Then tell me what it proves." "It gives us a physical link. Combined with the toxicology results, the security footage, the 911 recording, Keller's actions during the emergency, and the financial motive, it strengthens the case considerably." "Are you arresting him?" "We're moving now." Richard stood beside the window in his office. "Where is he?" "At his attorney's office." "Does he know?" "Not yet." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. "Detective." "Yes?" "Bring him in the right way." Morales understood what he meant. "No shortcuts." "No shortcuts." That answer would have surprised almost everyone who worked for Richard Whitmore. 2 weeks earlier, he would have wanted Keller dragged from the building before the phone call ended. Now he understood that anger could ruin the very result he wanted. Keller came out of his attorney's office 38 minutes later. 2 investigators were waiting near the entrance. He stopped when he saw them. His attorney moved first. "Detective, what is this?" Morales held out the documents. "Dr. Keller, you need to come with us." Keller looked at her, then toward the police vehicle. "For what?" "Your attorney can review the warrant." "This is absurd." Morales did not argue. Keller glanced toward the cameras already gathering across the street. His shoulders straightened automatically, the same practiced posture he used in television interviews. "I have cooperated from the beginning." Morales replied. "Then keep cooperating." One reporter shouted, "Dr. Keller, did police find new evidence?" Another called, "Are you being arrested in connection with Victoria Whitmore?" Keller's attorney tried to move between him and the cameras. Then one of the officers addressed him. "Mr. Keller, this way." Keller stopped. "Not doctor." "Mr. Keller." The change was small, but Morales saw it register. For the first time, Keller could not control how the people around him defined him. Across town, Annie was sitting at the kitchen table filling out forms for the EMT program when Morales called. She had spent nearly 20 minutes on one section because she kept changing her answer about available work hours. Lillian was beside the stove preparing coffee. Annie picked up. "Detective? We got the forensic report." Her pen stopped moving. "And?" The item recovered from the hotel had residue consistent with the substance found in Victoria. Annie sat straighter. "So, Kayla," Morales interrupted gently. "Careful." Annie caught herself. "So it supports what happened. It supports part of what we've been investigating. Did you arrest him?" "Yes." Annie said nothing. Lillian turned from the counter when she saw her daughter's face. Morales asked, "You still there?" "Yeah. I thought you'd have more to say." "I thought I would too." The words came out quieter than Annie expected. For days she had imagined what she would feel if police found something physical. Relief. Maybe. Satisfaction. The sense that all the questions about whether she had misunderstood Keller would finally stop. Instead, she felt tired. "Is something wrong?" Morales asked. "No." That didn't sound convincing. Annie looked at the unfinished application in front of her. "I just thought I'd feel better." Morales paused before answering. "Evidence gives a case somewhere to go. It doesn't erase what happened." Annie thanked her and ended the call. Lillian poured coffee into 2 mugs. "They arrested him?" Annie nodded. "And the thing from the hotel?" It matched what was in Victoria. Lillian placed a mug in front of her. "That's good. It should feel good." "Why?" "Because they found proof. Proof and peace are not the same thing." Annie looked at her mother. Lillian sat down. "You were scared. You got dragged into an investigation. People questioned your character because you helped someone. Him getting arrested doesn't make any of that disappear." Annie ran her thumb over the edge of the application form. "So when does it go away?" "Maybe it doesn't go away the way you want." "That's encouraging. I'm your mother. I'm not required to be encouraging before coffee." Annie smiled despite herself. Lillian reached across the table. "Relief and healing aren't the same thing. Give yourself time for both." Annie looked back at the application. For the first time in days, Keller's name was not the only thing occupying her thoughts. She picked up her pen again. At the hospital, Victoria received the news from Richard. "They arrested him?" "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly, then asked, "What happens now?" "The case continues." "And Vane?" "Still missing." Victoria opened her eyes. "So this isn't finished?" "No." Richard pulled a chair closer. "The evidence connects Keller more directly to what happened to you, but the money is another problem. They still don't have the full financial records." Victoria looked toward the laptop on her tray. "What about the deleted server?" "Some data was recovered." "Not enough." "And Vane knew where the rest was." "That's what they think." Victoria exhaled. Richard reached for her hand. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For every time I treated the foundation like something that could wait." Victoria squeezed his fingers. "Then don't waste the lesson by turning it into guilt." His phone rang before he could answer. "Morales." Richard put it on speaker. "We found something during the search of Keller's office," she said. Victoria leaned forward. "What?" "Several devices had references to the same file name." Richard asked, "What file name?" Morales answered, "Vane, Archive." Victoria and Richard exchanged a look. "Do you have the file?" Richard asked. "No. The original appears to have been moved." "Moved where?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Richard stood. "So Vane still has it?" "Possibly. Or he knows where it went," Victoria said. "If that archive contains the vendor records, it could show the entire network," Morales replied. "Which is why I need both of you to stay away from anyone connected to Vane." Richard almost objected, then stopped. "All right." Morales was quiet for half a second, almost surprised. "Good." The call ended. Richard looked at Victoria. She raised an eyebrow. "You listened again. Don't make a habit of noticing." But both of them understood what the new file meant. Keller's arrest had answered one question. It had not ended the investigation. Somewhere outside Houston, Douglas Vane was still moving, and the missing archive might contain every transaction Keller and his partners had spent years trying to hide. The name Vane, Archive, gave investigators what they had been missing, something specific enough to follow. By the next morning, Morales was working with financial investigators who had already started tracing Vane's business accounts, travel records, and digital access. Richard received only the updates they were legally able to share, which frustrated him almost as much as knowing Vane was still outside police custody. His head of corporate security stood across from his desk. "We have people who could locate him faster." Richard did not look up from the report in front of him. "No, Richard, we're talking about one man. We're talking about an active criminal investigation. We wouldn't touch him. We'd find him, and then Keller's attorneys would spend 6 months arguing that I ran my own investigation and contaminated evidence." The security chief paused. Richard closed the folder. "I want him found. I don't want a shortcut that lets him walk away later." The man nodded. "Understood." It was not an answer Richard would have given a month earlier, and he knew it. 2 days later, investigators traced a payment from one of Vane's shell companies to a short-term rental outside Houston. By the time officers arrived, the property was empty, but a digital access log showed Vane had been there less than 24 hours earlier. Morales called Richard that afternoon. "He's moving. Do you know where? We're narrowing it down. Does he still have the archive?" "We don't know." Richard exhaled through his nose. "I hate that sentence. You've had practice hearing it." "I haven't improved." Morales almost laughed. "Stay near your phone." Annie spent that same afternoon at Houston Community College completing another part of her EMT application. The routine helped. Forms had boxes. Deadlines had dates. Coursework had answers that did not depend on what lawyers said on television. When she finished, she stopped at a small watch repair shop between the college and the bus stop. The owner, Mr. Hanley, looked to be in his late 60s. He examined the old watch Annie placed on the counter. "Family piece?" "Yes, sir." "Worth much?" "To me." He nodded. "That's usually the kind that matters." He opened the back carefully. "Might take some work. Movement's old." "Can you fix it?" "I think so." Annie hesitated before handing it over. Mr. Hanley noticed. "I'll take care of it." She released the watch. "Thank you." When Annie stepped outside, Morales was calling. "We located Vane." Annie stopped near the curb. "Where?" "I can't discuss that yet." "Did you arrest him?" "He's in custody." Annie closed her eyes briefly. "Did he have the archive?" "We're working on that." "Of course you are." Morales gave a short laugh. "You're learning too." The search connected to Vane produced several devices and access credentials. One led investigators to an encrypted cloud storage account that had been opened under the name of a consulting business that had never employed a single person. The archive was there, not perfectly organized, not complete, but enough. Richard and Victoria were together when Morales called them to the foundation office 3 days later. Victoria had finally been discharged from the hospital and was moving more slowly than usual, though she had already rejected Richard's suggestion that she spend another week at home. "If I sit in that house one more day, I'm going to start auditing the furniture," she told him. Now she sat across from Morales with a legal pad in front of her. Morales opened a binder. "We recovered payment records, vendor agreements, internal communications, and copies of medical certifications." Richard asked, "How far back?" "Years." Victoria's face tightened. "How much money?" "The current estimate is in the millions." Richard's hand closed around the edge of the table. Morales continued before he could speak. The structure was consistent. Shell companies build the foundation for services that were inflated, duplicated, or never provided. Vane handled the financial side. Keller's medical approvals helped make the claims appear legitimate. Victoria looked down. "They used the clinics. They used the names of several programs. Yes, programs meant for people who couldn't afford care." Morales nodded. Victoria looked at Richard. "They didn't just take money from us." Richard understood. "No, they took it from people who were supposed to get help." His voice was low. "Then every dollar we recover goes back there." Morales turned another page. "There's more." Neither sibling spoke. "Several communications refer to your planned audit." Victoria leaned forward. "What do they say?" "Nothing that explicitly orders violence, but there are messages showing urgency after you requested the outside review." Morales read from her notes rather than the document itself. One message says the Victoria problem had to be handled before Monday. Richard's expression hardened. "From Kela? An account linked to him. And Vane?" He replied that delay was no longer possible. Victoria pressed her lips together. For the first time since leaving the hospital, some of her strength seemed to leave her. Richard reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Morales waited. Victoria finally asked, "Are there other victims?" "We found medical records connected to some of the fraudulent billing. We're reviewing several cases where documentation was altered." "Keller hurt other people?" "We don't know that." Richard looked at Morales. She continued, "There are enough irregularities to justify separate investigations. I'm not going to tell you more than the evidence supports." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's fair." It was not comforting, but it was fair. Later, Annie met Victoria at the foundation office. Victoria looked thinner than she had at the gala, but there was more color in her face. "They found the archive," Victoria said. "I heard. It was bigger than I thought." Annie sat across from her. "Are you okay?" Victoria considered the question. "No, but I'm getting there." Annie nodded. Victoria studied her for a moment. "You know what bothers me?" "What?" "I keep thinking about how small everything looked that night. One person collapsed. One doctor lied. One girl called 911. Annie smiled faintly. "I did more than call." "You did," Victoria continued. "But none of us knew that one moment was connected to millions of dollars. Fake clinics, destroyed records, and people who had been trusting the wrong man for years." Annie looked down at her hands. "I didn't expose all that." "No." Victoria reached across and touched her wrist. "You refused to look away long enough for everybody else to start seeing it." That evening, Morales called Annie with the next step. "The prosecutor wants to prepare you for testimony." Annie's stomach tightened. "When?" "Next week." "Do I have to memorize anything?" "No." "Should I read my old statements?" "Yes, but don't perform them. Tell the truth the way you remember it." Annie looked out through the apartment window. "What if Keller is there?" "He probably will be." For several seconds, Annie said nothing. Morales asked, "You still with me?" "Yes." "Scared?" Annie answered before pride could interfere. "Yes." "That's fine. Just don't confuse fear with being wrong." 2 days later, Mr. Hanley called. The watch was ready. Annie picked it up on her way home. When he placed it in her palm, the second hand was moving again. Tick, tick, tick. She fastened it around her wrist. The following morning, she entered the prosecutor's office wearing that watch. Soon, she would have to tell the story again in front of Keller, his lawyers, and people who had once found it easier to trust his title than her voice. This time, however, Annie would not be standing alone beside a woman on the floor. The evidence had finally caught up with her. Lillian adjusted the collar of Annie's navy suit outside the hearing room and stepped back. "There." Annie glanced down at herself. "Do I look nervous?" "Yes." "Thanks, Mom." "You asked." Annie touched the repaired watch on her wrist. The second hand moved steadily beneath the glass. Lillian noticed. "Your father's?" Annie nodded. "Then take him in there with you." Annie swallowed. "What if I mess something up?" "You correct it. What if they make me sound stupid?" "They might try. That's not helping." Lillian took both of Annie's hands. "Look people in the eye. Not because you owe anybody courage, because you owe yourself the truth." The door opened before Annie could answer. Detective Morales stepped into the hallway. "They're ready." Annie entered with her mother behind her. The hearing space looked nothing like the Grand Marlowe. No chandeliers, no champagne, no orchestra. Wooden benches faced the front. Attorneys sat behind long tables covered with folders, laptops, and legal pads. Richard and Victoria were seated several rows back. Victoria gave Annie a small nod. Then Annie saw Keller. He wore a dark suit and sat beside his attorneys, his hands folded on the table. Weeks earlier, he had controlled nearly every conversation around him. Now he had to wait for permission to speak. Annie took her seat. The prosecutor began with basic questions. "Please state your name." "Annie Carter." "Were you working at the Grand Marlowe on the evening Victoria Whitmore collapsed?" "Yes." "What was your job?" "Banque service." "Tell us what happened." Annie drew a breath. She described carrying trays through the gala, hearing glass break, seeing Victoria collapse, and running toward her. "What did you do when Miss Whitmore failed to respond?" "I checked her. She wasn't breathing normally, so I yelled for an AED." "Do you remember your exact words?" Annie glanced toward Victoria. "Yes." "What did you say?" "Someone get the AED now." The prosecutor walked her through what followed. Annie explained that Keller approached, told her to move, resisted her attempt to call emergency services, and asked security to remove her. "Did you obey him?" "No." Why not? Because Victoria needed help. Did Dr. Keller tell you there was no AED on that floor? Yes. Was that true? No. How did you know? I had seen the cabinet near the west elevators before the gala. The prosecutor displayed a still image from the hotel camera. It showed Keller walking past the AED earlier that evening. Do you recognize this location? Yes. Is that the AED cabinet? Yes. Who is walking past it? Dr. Keller. Keller's attorney rose for cross-examination. He approached Annie with a legal pad in one hand. Miss Carter, you are not a physician. No. You are not a registered nurse. No. You have never attended medical school. No. So when you decided Miss Whitmore required CPR, you were relying on basic emergency training. Yes. Basic. Yes. The attorney turned slightly toward the panel. Training that is hardly comparable to 30 years of medical practice. Annie said nothing. He faced her again. Would you agree Dr. Keller possessed vastly greater medical knowledge than you? Yes. Yet you ignored him. I followed the emergency dispatcher. The attorney paused. You ignored a physician. I kept helping Victoria. That wasn't my question. Then ask it again. A few people shifted on the benches. The attorney's mouth tightened. Did you believe you knew more than Dr. Keller? No. Then why refuse his instructions? Because what he wanted me to do didn't match what 911 was telling me to do. You assumed his actions were wrong. I knew he was trying to stop me from calling for help. Perhaps he was trying to stop an inexperienced banquet employee from interfering. Annie looked at him. He had the chance to help her himself. And you believe he did not? I saw what he did. You were frightened, were you not? Yes. Overwhelmed? Yes. Surrounded by people shouting? Yes. So your memory could be imperfect. Some parts could be. The attorney almost smiled. And yet you are accusing my client of trying to kill Victoria Whitmore. No. His expression changed. No? I never said I saw him poison her. The attorney stopped walking. Annie continued. I said I saw him with her before she collapsed. I said he tried to stop me from calling 911. I said he lied about the AED. I said I noticed something on her arm. The hospital found what was in her system. Police found the rest. The attorney returned to his table. The prosecutor stood again. One final question, Annie. She turned toward him. Why did you keep going after Dr. Keller told you to stop? Annie looked across the room. Victoria was sitting beside Richard, alive. Then Annie looked at Keller, because she was dying, and he was more interested in stopping me than saving her. This time no one moved for several seconds. The prosecutor thanked her. Annie stepped down, but her testimony was only one part of what followed. The 911 recording played next. Her own voice filled the hearing space. They keep pulling me away. Then the dispatcher. Continue compression. Keller's voice followed in the background. Put it away. Security footage showed him walking past the AED. Another clip showed him entering the restroom after Victoria was taken toward the ambulance. The forensic specialist explained that the discarded medical item recovered from the hotel contained residue consistent with the pharmaceutical agent found in Victoria's toxicology results. Financial investigators presented the archive recovered after Douglas Vane was taken into custody. They traced shell companies, false invoices, fabricated services, and approvals connected to Keller. Then came the communications about Victoria's audit. The prosecutor read one message aloud. The Victoria problem had to be handled before Monday. Another message from Vane's side stated that delay was no longer possible. The defense argued that the language referred only to the financial audit. The prosecutor did not need to argue loudly. The timeline did the work. Victoria announced the audit. Keller gave her something at the gala. She collapsed. He tried to prevent emergency intervention. He lied about the AED. A related item appeared in the restroom waste. The same substance was found in Victoria. The money provided the motive. The evidence provided the path. Richard sat beside his sister without speaking. He had spent years believing power meant getting the answer he wanted quickly. Watching the case unfold taught him something different. Real justice was slower because it had to survive questions, objections, doubt, and scrutiny. Keller finally lost the restraint he had carried throughout the proceeding. This entire case has been manipulated by the Whitmore family. His attorney touched his arm. Keller pulled away. They wanted a villain, so they created one. Richard did not respond. Keller looked toward Annie. And now everyone is supposed to accept the judgment of a banquet girl over a physician? Annie did not rise. She did not answer. She didn't need to. Morales had once told her that evidence did not care who seemed important. Now Keller was learning the same lesson. Outside the courthouse later that afternoon, reporters crowded the steps as Annie emerged with Lillian. Annie, do you feel vindicated? Annie, are you a hero? What do you want to happen to Dr. Keller? She stopped. Richard and Victoria came out several steps behind her. Annie looked toward the microphones. I want people to stop asking whether I was important enough to help, a reporter called. What does that mean? Annie touched the watch on her wrist. Ask me again when people in neighborhoods like mine have the same chance to survive that Victoria did. Richard heard every word. For the first time, he understood that Annie had never been asking him to reward her. She had been asking him to notice who still waited 30 feet too far from help. 3 weeks after the hearing, Richard invited Annie and Lillian to his home outside Houston. There were no reporters at the gate, no foundation staff, and no photographers waiting to turn the meeting into publicity. Victoria opened the front door herself. You came. Annie smiled. You invited us. I invite Richard to listen all the time. Results vary. Richard appeared from the hallway. I heard that. That was the idea. Victoria was moving more easily now, though she still tired faster than before the gala. Her doctors had reduced the frequency of her follow-up visits, and the cardiac monitor she once carried everywhere was gone. Lillian took her hand. You look stronger. I feel stronger. Good. Victoria smiled. That sounded like an order. It was. Richard led them to a dining area overlooking the yard. Coffee, iced tea, sandwiches, and pecan pie had been set out. But Annie immediately noticed the folder beside Richard's plate. She pointed at it. What's that? Something I've been waiting to discuss until your testimony was finished and the investigation reached the right point. Annie sat across from him. Richard opened the folder and pushed 2 documents toward her. The first was a financial gift, large enough that Annie read the number twice. The second was a commitment to cover her education and EMT training. She looked up. That's too much. Richard shook his head. No. Mr. Whitmore. Richard, not while you're putting numbers like this in front of me. Victoria covered a smile. Annie touched the edge of the document but did not pick it up. This isn't for what I testified to? No. You're sure? My attorneys are sure. Detective Morales is sure. Half the legal profession in Texas is probably sure by now. That drew a laugh from Lillian. Richard's expression softened. This is not payment for your testimony, Annie. It never could be. Then what is it? He looked toward Victoria. My sister gets to criticize me for another 40 years. Victoria raised her coffee cup. At least. Richard looked back at Annie. You gave my family something my money couldn't buy. I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to say thank you. Annie remained quiet for a few seconds. Lillian did not tell her what to do. That mattered. Finally, Annie picked up the papers. I'll accept the scholarship. Richard nodded. And the rest? She looked at her mother. We need some of it. Lillian smiled. That is the most realistic thing you've said in weeks. Annie laughed, then turned serious again. But I want to do something else with part of it. Richard waited. The AED. What about it? Annie thought of the Grand Marlowe. 30 feet. A white cabinet on a wall. Keller insisting it wasn't there while Victoria's heart had stopped. My neighborhood has a community center, churches, senior programs, small businesses. Some places have AEDs. A lot don't. Victoria understood before Richard did. You want more machines. Not just machines, training too. People need to know where they are and what to do before an ambulance gets there. Richard asked, how many? Annie gave him a cautious look. How many can we afford? Richard smiled. More than you think. Annie smiled back. Then more than you think. The Whitmore Foundation underwent a full independent audit over the following months. Investigators recovered millions through accounts connected to Douglas Vane and the companies he had helped create. Some funds could not be recovered, but what came back was redirected toward the healthcare programs the money had originally been intended to support. Keller's case continued through the courts. The evidence surrounding Victoria's poisoning, the interference during her medical emergency, the financial records, and the efforts to hide evidence formed separate parts of the prosecution. Vane faced his own charges, and investigators continued reviewing records connected to both men. Richard resisted every suggestion to make a public celebration out of it. When a communications consultant proposed naming a new medical initiative after the Whitmore family, Victoria stopped him halfway through the presentation. No. The consultant blinked. No to the name? No to making this about us? Richard nodded. The consultant looked surprised. Victoria pointed toward her brother. Write down the date. He agreed with me without arguing. Richard sighed. Please continue. 1 year after the gala, Annie stood inside a community center in South Houston wearing her EMT training uniform. Her repaired watch rested on her wrist, its second hand moving steadily as adults gathered around several training mannequins and AED demonstration units. On the wall behind her was a new emergency cabinet marked with a red heart. Beneath it was a small plaque. Every second matters. Annie preferred it that way. No giant donor names, no photograph of Richard, no dramatic story about the gala. Just something people could use. A gray-haired man in the front row raised his hand. I've got a question. Yes, sir? You really used one of these at that hotel? I did. You scared? Annie smiled. Very. He frowned. You didn't look scared on television. That was television. Several people laughed. He pointed toward the AED. So what made you do it? Annie considered the question. Being scared doesn't stop you from doing the right thing. The man nodded. Fair enough. She continued the demonstration. First thing, call 911. Put the phone on speaker if you're alone. Then follow the AED prompts. The machine tells you what to do. At the back of the center, Richard stood beside Victoria. He had offered to sit near the front. Annie had told him the seats were for people taking the class. So he stood. Victoria nudged him. Remember the ballroom? I remember enough of it. Everybody there thought people like us were the important ones. Richard watched Annie correct an older woman's hand position during the training exercise. We were wrong. Victoria looked at him. Getting philosophical at 50? Don't tell anyone. Across the center, Annie checked her watch. 1 year earlier, she had measured time in compressions, dispatcher instructions, and the distance to an AED. Now she measured it differently. Class schedules, certification exams, her mother working fewer hours, Victoria getting stronger. People learning something that might one day give another person a chance to come home. When the session ended, Richard approached. You're good at this. I'm learning. You always say that, because it's true. Victoria joined them. The foundation board approved the next group of AED placements. How many? 27. Annie smiled. Richard added, churches, senior centers, neighborhood gyms, community buildings. Good. And we're funding CPR training with them. Better. Richard shook his head. You're difficult to impress. Annie picked up her training bag. That sounds like a rich person problem. Victoria laughed so hard she had to put a hand against Richard's arm. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the parking lot as people headed home carrying CPR handouts and talking about what they had learned. Annie paused near the AED cabinet before leaving. The red heart on its door looked exactly like the one she had seen at the Grand Marlowe. Only now nobody was trying to pretend it wasn't there. That night, hundreds of powerful people had stood beneath crystal chandeliers while Victoria Whitmore's heart stopped beating. The doctor everyone trusted told them to stay back. The young black woman carrying champagne glasses was the one who refused. And sometimes justice begins exactly that way, not with the richest man nearby, not with the most respected title, but with the one voice brave enough to shout, "Someone get the AED." This story reminds us that courage is not measured by age, wealth, race, or title, but by what we choose to do when another person needs help. Annie proves that doing the right thing may require standing against people who appear more powerful or respected, while Richard learns that loyalty without truth can become dangerous. Most importantly, the story shows that justice may come slowly, but one honest voice, one brave action, and one person willing to refuse silence can expose a lie and protect many others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.